So tomorrow is Good Friday. It's a day off school for everybody, except for us. A day for girls to go out and buy their new Easter dresses and parents to be filling Easter eggs with chocolate, and for all the worship leaders to be setting up their drum kits and their microphones. Because Holy Week is a celebration. It's the culmination of our Christian calendar. Because after all, Easter is like the Black Friday of Christianity. This is preparation week for the day of the year that we make church look good. It's our chance to sell it because the whole world is watching. But we don't have a lot of time, maybe a few hours at the most. We can't miss a moment of it. Tomorrow is Good Friday. It will be a day of pain and shame. And Jesus sits at the table with his disciples, knowing that this is the last meal he's going to be sharing with them. He must have felt like an anxious mother who's about to send her children out into the world. Are they ready for this? Did I tell them everything they needed to know? What is the last thing that I'm going to leave with them? He doesn't have much time. A few hours at the most. He can't miss a moment. From John chapter 13, starting in verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you will never wash my feet." But Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Peter. He's always saying what everybody's thinking, and I can only imagine what's going through the disciples' heads as they nervously glance back and forth at each other. Is this how he proclaims his messianic rule? This isn't quite what they had in mind. Jesus was the one they've been waiting for, the one who would restore the kingdom to Israel and glorify God's chosen people again. So this isn't exactly the best campaign slogan. And then too, maybe they had that nagging feeling that this was only a hint of what was to come. If this is what the Messiah does, what does he expect of us? Oh, Peter, I can just hear his disbelief. "Lord, don't you understand how the kingdom is going to work?" Yeah, Jesus knows what's about to happen to him. He understands how things work here. But I think that as he looks into Peter's eyes and reaches for his foot anyway, he's wordlessly saying, "No, Peter, you don't understand how the kingdom works." Peter is the one who says, "Lord, I will follow you even to death. I will lay down my life for you." But this is a little different. There's no glory here. For as Jesus stripped off his outer garments, he stripped off glory and pride. He wrapped himself not in a robe, but in a towel. He held not a scepter, but a basin. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Holy Week is when we make following Jesus look glamorous. But Holy Week was when following Jesus became humiliating. Because if there was one thing that Jesus could leave with his disciples, it was this. This is what power looks like. If there was one thing they needed to know, it was that power doesn't compete and conquer and control. The real kind of power, that his power, denies its rights and kneels to serve. Power isn't the top-down structure of competition and politics and fame. Power is the king down on his knees in the place of a servant, dirtying his hands with the mud and the sweat of his subjects' feet. He said the first would be last. But here's where I start feeling a little bit uneasy. I mean, this doesn't apply to us, does it? Because Easter did happen and Jesus was glorified, and being a Christian means being part of the winning team, right? And even if we don't think it in so many words, I think that the pride in us wants to share in the glory of Christ without truly being willing to share in his humiliation. Do we want to follow Jesus into the slums, or do we just want the mansion over the hilltop? He who humbles himself will be exalted. But if we only serve to be exalted, have we truly lived in humility? No, this wasn't just for the disciples. This was for us. For when he had finished washing their feet, he He put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, I am. So now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." If we follow Jesus, this seems to imply, no status excuses us from our obligation to serve. He gives no command, but maybe his silent demonstration speaks even louder, because now we see what it looks like for power to kneel. Nope, if that's how it's going to be, Lord, you will never wash my feet. I'll do anything for you, anything but this. I'll follow you to death, I'll bear the cross, I'll be your right-hand man and your lawyer and your makeup artist, anything to make you look good, to make us look good. Because of Easter, we've glorified the cross when there is no glory there. We've made it a symbol of power when it stood for humiliation. And in fact, it seems easier to us to carry the cross than to wash feet, because Sunday morning came and the stone was rolled away and Jesus was finally dressed in his kingly robes and glory, hallelujah, Christ is risen. But feet are dirty again the next day. We want to die with Christ and be raised with Christ and be glorified with Christ, but we don't want to be stuck holding the towel and the basin until he comes. There's no glory here. But this was the last thing that Jesus chose to leave with his disciples. So somehow we have to wrestle with its meaning for us. We have to wrestle with what it means for us to follow Christ. Because before we can follow him to Calvary, we have to follow him to the upper room. Before we can take up our cross, we have to take up our towel and wash the feet of society. If we are truly to follow Jesus, we too must deny our rights and kneel to serve. And I think about washing feet, and I think about an elderly man named Jim at the church where I grew up, who still cares for his wife and helps her eat and go to the bathroom and dress up pretty for Sunday morning church, even though she hardly knows who he is anymore. I think about my dad's rough, calloused locksmith hands installing deadbolts for people who can't afford it. I think about the nurse who smiles at her patients as she unwearyingly empties their bedpans. If you want to know what washing feet looks like, watch the people who lower themselves to exalt another person. Watch the uncelebrated acts of kindness that no one will ever know about. Then go and follow the example that he has left for us. Glory has nothing to do with scepters and crowns. If it does, Jesus' only glory was thorns. And if our kind of glory is what we seek on Good Friday, we'll come away from the cross disillusioned and disappointed and empty, because his kingdom is not of this world. His glory is not the stuff of performance and popularity. His glory is simply himself. His glory is love and justice and a redeemed creation, and to be glorified means to be with him. If glory and power are what we seek, we haven't understood Easter at all. But if Jesus is what we seek, he's promised that we will find him. We'll knock, and the door will be opened, and there he'll be, kneeling on the floor, passing the towel and the basin to you. And he'll smile, because serving with you is more fun than serving alone. Now, resurrection doesn't mean that we'll have the power and the fame that we desire, but it does mean that Jesus is with us always to the end of the age.